Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today's Bible study video is going to be on Daniel chapter 1, and I make Bible study videos once a month, so if you would like to see more content like this, please be sure to subscribe. And I have a Patreon where I share my Bible study notes and behind the scenes Bible study videos, so if you would like to check that out, I will have the link in my description box below. So what I'm going to be doing is just reading different sections of Daniel chapter 1, and then I will be talking about the details in that section. So let's just get started. During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. So the first question that I think of is, why is God allowing Nebuchadnezzar to come in and steal from the Israelites? And the thing is that Israel was not doing well, so Israel was not being obedient to God. They were not honoring his word, and they were not respecting what he said, and they were not obeying him. And so God was allowing Nebuchadnezzar to come in there to show that he was going to punish them, and he was going to judge them for their sins. And so that was why he was allowing Nebuchadnezzar to come in and take over their city and steal from them. So not only did Nebuchadnezzar steal the sacred objects, but he also stole people, which we are going to be seeing in the next several verses. So picking up in verse 3, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Okay, so I'm just going to be referencing my notes here. So Daniel means God is my judge, and we can see in the following chapters that he lived up to his name, and he lived a life of faith and obedience. And we're going to be studying in this chapter how he actually lived up to that. So, now I'm going to keep reading the next 2 verses. So verse 6, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, Azariah was called Abednego. So we don't hear too much about the other 3 young men except for the later chapter. If you're familiar with this book, there's the chapter of them being thrown into the fiery furnace and not being burned up, but they are included in this chapter to some extent. I'm sorry, that's my son out there making a bunch of noise. Hope it's not too bothersome. But anyways, Daniel, his name was changed to Belteshazzar, and Belteshazzar means Baal protect the king. And Baal is thought to be a Canaanite version of the Babylonian god Marduk, and identical with the Assyrian deity Hadad. And so Belteshazzar was an attempt of the enemy to redefine Daniel's assignments and to redefine his very identity as a servant of their gods. And Hananiah means grace, mercy, gift of the Lord. And his name was changed to Shadrach. And Shadrach means command of Aku. Aku means moon god. So basically, his name Shadrach meant command of the moon god. Mishael means who is asked for or lent. Meshach means guest of a king. Azariah means who is helped by God. Abednego means servant of Nabu. Nabu was a major god in the Babylonian religion. So each of their changed names was setting them up to serve the king of Babylon and to become part of their religion in Babylon. And so obviously this was an amazing opportunity for them to be chosen to be a servant of the king. They were taken captive, and so to be chosen to serve the king was better than being a slave. So basically, these 3 or 4 young men had this amazing opportunity presented to them, but what the king Nebuchadnezzar did not know was that Daniel and his 3 friends served the God of the whole entire earth, the God who was bigger than all of their gods, and they were not willing to bow their knee to Nebuchadnezzar or to any of their own gods. So, yeah, they were at the king's mercy, and if they wanted any chance at a good life as a captive, this was it, but it meant that they had to do whatever he commanded. And so, yeah, I guess I need to read the next few verses here, starting in verse 8. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel, but he responded, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I am afraid the king will have me beheaded. So, the reason why Daniel did not accept this food, for one thing, it was not kosher, and God had given the Israelites all these rules and laws about the food, and obviously this was still the Old Testament, so they still had to follow all these laws and stuff. So, Daniel was going to be obedient and follow those laws. So that was one reason why he did not eat the food. But the reason why he did not accept the food, most likely, like the main reason was, besides that it wasn't kosher, was that it was probably offered to idols. And yeah, it was not like a health choice. It wasn't like he didn't want the food that the king offered, because it was probably really good food, and probably he wasn't getting very good food otherwise. So it was obviously a sacrifice that he had to make. He could have eaten the food, but it would have changed his faith. It would have meant that he would be agreeing with the pagan religion from that time. And so it meant that he had to say no. If he wanted to be faithful to God, he had to say no. And yeah, refusal of the food meant that they could have been severely beaten, they could have been tortured, they could have even been killed, they could have gone through some severe punishment. And Nebuchadnezzar was not necessarily a kind king. I'm pretty sure he would have treated them pretty harshly. But Daniel and his friends were putting their lives on the line, and they were going to be faithful to God, even if it meant that they would get killed or be tortured or beaten or whatever. They were willing to do whatever they had to do to be faithful to God. And Daniel could have questioned God. They were taken captive. He could have been mad at God and been like, why would you let me be captive? Why wouldn't you rescue me? Why didn't you take me back to Jerusalem? But instead, he was still faithful, and he still chose to keep doing what God said. And I think that is some real faith right there. So I think Daniel had obviously been obeying God for years. I don't think this was an isolated incident. I think he had been obeying for a long time already. And I actually did not research this, but I think he was still pretty young at this point. And so he probably had been like obedient to God for most of his life, and he might have even been known to be radical to his friends. And considering that most of the Israelites were worshiping idols, it was more than likely that all of his other friends were already doing idol worship, and so they didn't really care if the food was offered to idols. But it seemed like Daniel had not been doing the idol worship, and so that was why he was choosing to reject the food. And if Daniel had not obeyed, he would not have received the blessing that God wanted to give him. It was not the food that granted him the blessing. It was God who recognized his dedication and faith, shown by his rejecting the food offered to idols. For Daniel, nothing was more important than serving the Lord, even food. And we can see here the results of Daniel's obedience. I think I'm at verse... I'm at verse 11. Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom, and God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. When the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. So obviously I think we can all learn some really big lessons through Daniel's choices here. And I found this quote from a guy named Nate Johnston. He said, "Rock bottom can be your saving grace in an hour of idols and other lovers." And we can see here that Daniel was at a point of rock bottom. I can just imagine how dark this time must have been if he had such a heart for God. He must have been concerned about Israel and how they were so involved in idol worship and the state of his nation in being captured, and he could see that they were not doing well. And so this must have been a very dark time for him. But even in that place, he was able to see in his own heart where his choices were supposed to, what his choices were supposed to be, and he had a pure heart. He allowed that hard time to refine him and to make him be more pure and wholehearted toward God. And so for me, it's really been a time of being at rock bottom for the last couple of months if you've been watching my channel. And I feel like it's just been a really purifying time for me as well, just being willing to make different choices and being willing to make huge sacrifices for the sake of God doing huge things in our lives, even though not everybody understands. And so I had thought of a few questions here. What are we agreeing with? And where does our allegiance lie? What are we eating spiritually? What are we consuming? Obviously, things like movies and books and music and anything that we consume affects us. And so if we're taking in the things of the world and if we're allowing worldly mindsets and worldly ideas to fill our hearts and fill our minds through movies and music and social media and all of that, we're going to be changed and we're going to become like the world. And so we have to be mindful of those things, and we have to ask ourselves, what idols am I setting up in my heart, and what is more precious to me than God? What is influencing my decisions daily? What is making me do the things that I do? And for me, I had to think of this question. Is it my reputation? Am I too afraid to be known as quote unquote radical because of what others around me are doing or what they might think of me? So one thing God has been really pruning out of my heart is fear of men. So Proverbs 15 verse 33 says, "Fear of the Lord teaches wisdom. Humility precedes honor." So for me, that really hit home because I definitely have a weakness of being afraid of what people think and being afraid of others' opinions of me and sort of trying to do what will make other people happy. But God has been teaching me that what He wants for me is to fear Him first and not allow fear of man to dictate my choices. Daniel's choice to honor God's word above the king's command is what granted him the wisdom of God. Daniel specifically received the gift of interpreting the meanings of visions and dreams. So James 4 verse 4 says, "You adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? I say it again, if you want to be a friend of the world, you make yourself an enemy of God." And 1 John chapter 2 verses 15 and 17 says, "Do not love this world, nor the things it offers you, for when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from this world. And this world is fading away, along with everything that people crave. But anyone who does what pleases God will live forever." Do you want to be famous on earth or famous in heaven? If you care too much about people's opinions of you, your reputation in heaven will be lost. If you want your fleshly desires to be satisfied, if you care only about what people think, if you care only about seeing your own plans and dreams fulfilled, you'll lose your eternal reward. But if you choose the path of sacrifice, love, and obedience, you will be well known in heaven. Making the name of Jesus high on this earth will grant you eternal victory, and it will grant you a place in the kingdom of heaven. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and please let me know what other suggestions of Bible studies that you have for me. I would love to hear what you have, what you would like to hear. And so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.